uselessness. Depression is something that nearly everyone battles with. There's an illustration here I want to give you. Many years ago, a Midwestern lawyer suffered from such deep depression that his friends thought it best to keep all knives and razors out of his reach. He questioned his life's calling and the prudence of even attempting to follow through. During this time he wrote, "I am now the most miserable man living. Whether I should ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully abode, I shall not." You know who wrote that? Abraham Lincoln wrote that. He was a man who suffered with severe depression. Probably a lot brought on by the Civil War and the anxieties of, a nation torn apart and the issues that came about and some of the things that he dealt with. There's a lot of different types of depression. And I really tried to gather as much stuff and knowledge as I could. I went back in some old psych books and stuff and gathering up knowledge and looking at things. And because when we say depression, it's such a large category that a lot is shoved into. And I've seen Christians who were so fundamental and legalistic that they would not embrace a doctor's care to get help, and would only allow or pastors that would only allow their congregations to pray for healing. I don't really embrace interpretation of Scripture that way, because God uses all things for His glory. And so, as a pastor, I want to say, God, when I pray for help, God sends help to me in a lot of different forms. And so it is with depression. Depression is a very broad subject, and there's a lot of different levels of depression that we can look at. I mean, look at some of these different types of depression. I want to throw them up on the screen. And let me just say, you might want to jot this note down, psychologyinfo.com. Okay? It's interesting, there's a statistic that just as many people are cured from depression by online internet activity as they are by actually seeing a psychologist in person. Only difference is you can't get drugs yet. It covers depressive disorders that come in different forms, and a lot of different diagnoses or how to interpret that. But one of the main types of depression that we learn about is major depression. It's the most serious type of depression in terms of numbers of symptoms and severity of symptoms, major depression, but there are significant individual differences in the systems and the severity. Different people suffer from major depression in different ways. You do not feel the need necessarily to be suicidal, but yet you can have major depression. You don't need to have a history of hospitalizations, although both of these factors are present in some people with major depression. When people use the term depression or clinical depression, they are generally referring to major depression disorder. Major depression disorder is a mood disorder characterized by a depressed mood and a lack of interest in activities normally enjoyed, changes in weight and sleep, fatigue, feelings of worthlessness and guilt, difficulty concentrating, thoughts of death and suicide. If a person experiences the majority of these symptoms for longer than a 2-week period, they could in fact be diagnosed in having major depression disorder. There is no official diagnosis of something less than that called moderate depression. Please forgive me if I stay close to my notes, because I want to make sure that this is a very serious issue in life, and the Lord's going to flesh out how serious that is to us. There's a dysemic disorder, refers to a low to moderate level of depression. So instead of saying, categorizing major and moderate and minor, most of the time when you see this dysemic disorder, it refers to normally a moderate level of depression that persists and can persist for up to 2 years, sometimes even longer. While the symptoms are not as severe as major depression, they are more enduring and resistant to treatment. Some people with dysthymia develop a major depression at some time during the course of their depression, so it can elevate. Of course, then if they can't figure out what it is, they can throw you in a category called unspecified depression. Okay? This category is used to help researchers who are studying other specific types of depression and do not want their data confounded by marginal diagnosis. It's amazing, you know, over the period of 20 years, how many different types of depression and disorders and symptoms that we find. Maybe some of these you've heard of before. It includes unspecified depression, includes people with a serious depression, but not quite severe enough to have a diagnosis of major depression. It also includes people with chronic, moderate depression, which has not been present long enough for a diagnosis of dysemic disorder. You get the idea? It's kind of, if we don't know where to put it or what to call it, we kind of stick it in that category there. Now we have this issue, this depression, adjustment depression disorder. Any of y'all ever experienced that before? It occurs between, in response to major life stressors or crises or rapid change in your life. You could have adjustment depression disorder. Then we have bipolar depression. You've probably heard of the term bipolar. Bipolar disorder is an illness that consists of alternating periods of elevating moods called manic episodes. And depression, mood swings run on a spectrum of mild mania called hypomania to the more severe. Deliberating heights, periods of mania can last for hours, days, weeks, or even months before depression returns. The mood swings, as well as a variety of other significant symptoms, not present in other depressions. So a bipolar person could have some symptoms that might not show up in those other categories, but a person is kind of deals with their mood. Their moods vary drastically from one extreme to the other, almost like flipping a switch. Here's one probably some of you have heard before, postpartum depression. You've heard of that. Pregnancy brings about many hormonal shifts. These dramatic shifts can sometimes affect mood. This is commonly known as the baby blues. Postpartum depression can be more than just a case of blues, however. It can range from mild symptoms that go away without treatment all the way to postpartum psychosis, which left untreated may be responsible for tragic murders of children. Psychotic depression disorder. Some of you people maybe that grew up in the 60s and used to trip out on acid, maybe you can embrace this one a little bit. Psychotic depression, delusional thoughts or other symptoms of psychosis accompanying the symptoms of depression. With psychotic depression, there is a break with reality. Patients with psychotic depression experience hallucinations and delusions. There's a pretty serious form of that. If you're having hallucinations and delusions, I'd be happy to pray with you, and we can probably find you somebody that you can see in town that might help you with that. But unfortunately, these are some of the depressions that affect us. Here's another one. I was happy to find this because I didn't realize I suffered from it. Seasonal affect disorder. If you experience depression, sleepiness, weight gain, carbohydrate cravings during the winter months, but you feel as soon as spring feel great as soon as spring returns, you may have this condition called seasonal affect disorder, or SAD. I've found myself suffering with this right now. It's called rut depression disorder. And it doesn't mean that I'm in a rut. See, this time of year, the white-tailed deer want to mate, and they call that the rut. And it normally happens somewhere where I'm not at, and at a time that I can't be there. And so I often find myself depressed that I'm not able to participate in that. Then we have the premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PMS. It often leads to PMDD. And I believe men can suffer from this as well. If you don't believe me, some of you ladies, you can talk to your husband and see if they suffer from the symptoms of this depression. I'm sorry, poor attempt at humor. Atypical depression symptoms such as improved mood when good things happen, overeating, sleeping too much, or sensitivity to rejection. These are symptoms symptoms characteristic of atypical depression, which is a depression which does not follow the typical set of depression symptoms, such as a lack of appetite and insomnia. It's actually more common than the name might imply. So there's a lot of different types of depressions there. There were just a few of them. There's a lot of other ones that you may hear. And some other types of depressions fall into these major categories. And so some of them, all of them, I believe, we can get help with. Some are more difficult to diagnose than others. Some are more difficult to heal than others. Some people struggle with some of these things all of their life. Someone who suffers from psychotic disorder probably will have to take some sort of medication to help with that for the remainder of their life, and fail to do so can cause problems. And so that's why at the beginning and all through the week I was asking God to allow me to find the balance in speaking to you as a pastor, because I'm not a clinical psychiatrist. I do a lot of counseling over the time to help the year to help people with stuff. I can't prescribe medications. I am a pastor who believes that medications with the appropriate diagnosis and at the appropriate time and for the appropriate individual can be a way that God can use to help you through your problem. I also am a pastor that believes that there's just too many narcotics given out to too many people because they don't feel good. Did you know that the age bracket of the largest user of antidepressant drugs is children in elementary school? Is the largest user of kids are the largest user of antidepressant drugs. And so I gathered up a bunch of stuff that I just want to share with you, and then God, I think, is going to bring some things out about how we can have victory. But I think the more we know about something, the better we are. The more I know how the evil one's going to attack me, the more prepared I can be. Amen? I mean, the more knowledge you have about automobiles, the better chance of picking a good one out when you go to buy one, right? So the more information we stuff in the can, maybe the Lord will allow us to use that to kind of understand some things that we deal with and go on. And so, and I want to make sure before we go on any further that you understand that I'm not advocating that anybody who suffers from particular types of depression should stop seeing their doctor, stop taking their medication, or not go to a doctor and strictly rely on the power of prayer and healing. You got that, right? I also want to say, as the power of God, there is nothing that God can't heal through the power of prayer and healing. So I want to make sure that you understand that. I want you to know that God helps us in many different ways through the people that God sends into our path. I love that joke, you know, where the flood comes into town and the water's rising and he gets on the rooftop and he prays out to God to save him, and the fire department comes by in a boat and they say, "Come on, get in the house." And he said, "That's okay, I'm praying to God to save me." A little while later they come by and the water's up to the chimney and the guy's hanging on, and they say, "Get in the boat." And the guy says, "No, that's okay, I've prayed to God to save me." A little while later, you know, a helicopter flies by and the guy's hanging on to the TV antenna. This was a while back because we don't have TV antennas anymore. But he's hanging on to it, and the helicopter yelling down, you know, "Come on, climb up the ladder, get in there." And the guy goes, "That's okay, I'm praying to God." And he dies. And he's in heaven, and he says, "Father," he said, "you know, I cried out for you to help me. Why didn't you save me?" And God said, "What are you talking about? I sent 2 boats and a helicopter."